Okay. Sorry, I just updated this unit and the time is reading out differently than it did before. That's a little odd. So we're continuing the nervous system and two polar bears. What I'm saying, I lift, you grab. Was that concept just a little too complex, Carl? In a way, the prey goes. Just watched a video yesterday about intelligence in octopi. And it is interesting because they did address the fact that the rules of intelligence are definitely broken by octopus and to some extent other cephalopods. There's some squids that are pretty doggone intelligent too. In the other group where you find what we would define as intelligence, the vertebrates, it's almost always associated with social structure and lifespan. That animals that have to relate to a bunch of individuals within a complex social structure and that live a long time tend to be where you find intelligence. Doesn't always produce intelligence, but it tends to be where you find intelligence. And even in insects, social structure. But an octopus is a very solitary animal that lives a fairly short time. Typical octopus lifespan is like 3 years, and yet they are very highly intelligent. So the rules of intelligence have been kind of expanded to possibly include what they're calling ecological intelligence, where other mollusks are shelled. They have their protection on them all the time. Octopus isn't, and they're hypothesizing that intelligence was an additional protection advantage, which of course it is. One of those, evolution stuff is very, very difficult to test, and sometimes it makes sense, and that's really how it catches on, because everybody in the room goes, "Oh yeah, that makes sense," and sometimes it only makes sense to a very select few people. Is that evolutionary psychology? Now we're going to talk about cnidarians, sea anemones, jellyfish, corals have a decentralized nerve net. This is the group where not only is it very diffuse, but information can travel in both directions on the same neurons. Like train tracks, where there's a single train track and trains go in both directions. It is set up to keep things from going two different directions at the same time. Bad for trains, bad for nerve nets. Cnidarians are considered to be fairly simple. I've worked with them, I've read about them. They're never as simple as their reputations. But, and they'll tell you that most of the nervous reactions you get from cnidarians are threshold based, where you do something and you don't get a reaction, do it a little bit more powerfully, you don't get a reaction, you do it a little bit more powerfully, you hit the threshold and you get this huge reaction, which suggests that these animals don't have any real subtlety to their behavior. They do. Is that I often wonder how much experience with the actual animals people have when they make these grand pronouncements about groups. I mean, I don't have that much experience, and I know that that's not right. In central systems, in many invertebrates, you get a double ventral solid nerve cord. Now, the reason solid is in quotes is because there isn't any good word to put here. What we're doing is we're differentiating from vertebrate cords, which are hollow, to these chords which are not hollow. And I guess not hollow is a possibility here, but it very often is listed as solid, and often not with the quotes about it. So you kind of feel like, oh wow, they've got really hard nerves. They don't. They just don't have an opening in the middle. And of course, we talked last time about the more complex are what you find in cephalopods and social insects. Social insects get behaviorally pretty interesting. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get into behavior. War and revenge, all sorts of things. Slavery. We're going to focus a little bit more on the vertebrates because that's generally what you do in a biology class, because the invertebrates don't count. Remember, this starts as a plate down the back, the dorsal side of the animal. And it's a single plate, and it curls up into a single cord. And because it's a plate that curls up, it's hollow in the middle. And it does retain that space, sometimes very, very small, but it does retain that hollowness as it develops. And then it branches nerves out from the edges of the hollow. In the brains, you've got a hindbrain, a midbrain, and a forebrain. The hindbrain in us, the medulla is right at the top of the spinal cord. Well, it is in other animals too, except it's at the front, because not all of them stand up like we do. The medulla is kind of your unit to keep all your automatic stuff going. Your medulla interacts with your heartbeat, with your digestive rhythm, with your lung breathing rhythms, stuff that's kind of always going on in the background but does need adjustment. Your heart rate can be speeded up and slowed down, breathing rate. I don't know how much your medulla is involved in speeding up your digestive rate as a response to invaders. I think that's more of an inflammatory reaction than it is a medulla saying speed everything up, guys, reaction. But I actually don't know that. I never even came up before doing all this stuff that, or I said it earlier and go, oh, I have to go look that up. And then when I was done doing the class or the video, it's completely flown out of my head. The cerebellum is the coordination center. Brain decides to do something, says to the cerebellum, we need to do this. Cerebellum goes, okay, boss, but then we need this muscle working and that muscle working and this muscle working, and we can get this together. We can, like right now, these words coming out of my mouth are being decided higher up, but the cerebellum is coordinating my tongue and my vocal cords, and to some extent even my breathing, and actually even doing things I'm not conscious of, like moving my hands, my little Tyrannosaur hands. That I'm curious now that I'm watching myself on video whether I do this when I teach to a room or whether I'm doing this specifically so that I'm on screen with my gestures. But the little Tyrannosaur hands are kind of distracting me when I watch some of my videos. Incidentally, at the beginning of the semester, I told you I was trying to give you the feel of what it would be like to be in class. And so I've sat down and watched a couple of these with my wife, who sat in my class a bunch of times. And she says it very much is the same feeling that you would get being in a lecture with me. Is that the one downside that I kind of hate is that there's nobody asking me questions. But then through its typical semester with a whole bunch of classes, nobody ever asked me any questions anyway. So it's not that different from a lot of the classes that I teach. I really would prefer, questions, but what can you do? People are asking me questions by email. Well, I got room here. The midbrain is generally considered to be the part of the brain devoted to the really important senses. In us, that would be our optic lobe, which is in the back of our brain, and is a whole bunch of brain devoted to making sense of what we see. In other animals, it might be the olfactory center, trying to make lots and lots of sense of what the smells are coming in. And it's for humans, it may be a little bit difficult to understand, but the world of smells is incredibly complex. And there's an indication that even in us, and extrapolate to things that have a great sense of smell, we build sense receptors as we go through our lifetime in response to the smells that we smell, so that we get more and more sensitive. We can differentiate better. Some people more than others, but in other animals, it looks like we're building them with almost the same sort of machinery that we build antibodies. On-demand molecules to attach to antigens, on-demand molecules to respond to particular smell inputs that we're being experienced in our environment. Words not going together too well today. Well, you got a hind and a mid, now you got a forebrain. And I probably have to move that. I do. As unfortunate as it is to try to compare our nervous system to products that people make, it's kind of impossible to not do it with computers, and I've talked about this before. And if we're a computer, this is our central processing unit. This is our CPU. Your thalamus is your interpreter and your referral unit and your decision maker and your exporter. So information comes in from the senses, right? Through the inner neurons connected to the sensory neurons. And your thalamus is there going, so, what are we looking at? What are we listening to? What are we smelling? And it does a little bit of processing and then decides, okay, we need to go check against this memory. We need to go check against that memory. We need to check about this. This is something new to our experience. So what's the rest of the context? What do we need to think about in terms of, we're smelling this new unusual smell. Is it just, it's a new unusual smell? Or, I wonder if this means that, my computer's actually burning up. It kind of smells like other things I've smelled that have been burning. This one's a little bit different, but it may be that something around me is burning. I need to make some decisions. And so your thalamus is doing all this other stuff, reaching into your emotion center. How do we feel about what's happening? Should we be afraid? Should we be angry? Is it all sexy? There's all sorts of stuff like that your thalamus is figuring out. Your thalamus also is active when you're sleeping. It takes in information in the course of a couple of days, and it puts it into working memory and temporary memory. And then while you're sleeping, during at least REM sleep and possibly other periods of the night, you're going into these these temporary storages, and you're going, okay, we need to put this where it's permanent, where we can get it in a year from now, hopefully. And it's a filing system where different aspects, you don't remember an experience like it was a film. You remember the emotional aspects, you remember the sensory aspects, you remember the cognitive aspects in different places. In fact, I do believe this is my theory, so there's I have no backing for this whatsoever, except that it makes sense to me. And I'll tell you the truth, I can't find the original reference I'm going to refer to, but I do remember reading about years ago about memory research, and this is a problem. It's years ago, so it's really hard to find stuff that old now. Where if you're talking to somebody and you're having a conversation, you ask them a question, and they need to dip into a memory that is largely emotional or largely cognitive or largely sensory, that when they start to think about it and their eyes go kind of blank, the eyes drift in different directions depending on what kind of memory they're accessing. And I don't remember the directions with the different memories, but it had it in the book. Now, it's very unlikely that you were looking around in a dream during your REM sleep. You are dreaming, but you're dreaming because you're rummaging through all your filing system in order to put stuff away. And so that's why dreams almost always associate to things that have happened to you in the last couple of days, and often pull in things from the past. And there's one level of your brain that's trying to make sense of it like it was a story, but is having some trouble doing that. So you wind up with these disjointed dreams. But rather than necessarily being this huge window into your psychology, which it is to some extent, because there's emotional memories and in new memories connected to important old memories, but a lot of the impressionistic part of dream analysis probably doesn't really work. But the fact that your eyes are darting around, I think, is a side effect of opening different files to put different things away. But as I said, no evidence. Not even sure how you would test that. I mean, you could test the original thing that I found. Somebody did. Your hypothalamus, we talked about. It's a monitoring center. It also is a processor for certain types of impressions, and it interacts with the thalamus, of course. This is what's sometimes called the reptile brain, because a lot of the forebrain, when you look at, let's say, a snake's brain, there's not a heck of a lot of forebrain there, and a lot of the processing is hypothalamic. And since we think of snakes as more primitive than us, then we consider it the reptile brain and full of these primitive urges. You'll actually see that term. In this case, fear, sex, anger to some extent is processed through the hypothalamus. And for those of you who, I don't know how I'm going to end that sentence, so I'm not going to end that sentence. But there is a fairly popular drug whose major target cells are in the hypothalamus. Remember, target cells can apply to almost anything. In this case, it's not hormonal, it's drug-related. And the different psychoactive drugs, which most drugs are, often target different parts of the brain. Is cocaine targets the pleasure centers. Alcohol just depresses everything. But your inhibitions, to a large extent, are depressed in that. And marijuana targets a lot of the hypothalamus. So you get these, hunger is processed in the hypothalamus. That is probably the one marijuana side effect that's fairly common, is that where sex is addressed, some people get more hypersexual, some people get the hyposexual. Where fear, some people get their fear levels drop and they get kind of easygoing about things, and some people get really paranoid. So what the marijuana does in the hypothalamus can be very different in different people, although it tends to make most people hungry. And of course, it's connected by a stalk to the pituitary, the hypophysis. We've already talked about that. And then up above this, you've got your cerebrum, which has, again, 2 levels. Your paleocortex, your older cortex, which also is very much involved in your limbic systems. Your medulla may be adjusting your heart rate, but your paleocortex is the one that's kind of deciding what needs to go, needs to speed up, needs to slow down. Same thing with all the other stuff that your medulla is working. A lot of times people connect the paleocortex to the unconscious, to the things that are kind of pushing our decisions in certain directions that we're not really totally aware of. Very much associated with emotional responses. And there's a very strong indication that we need an active emotional response system in order to effectively make decisions. Is that people that have issues with their limbic system get very, very indecisive. When they're depending totally on cognitive comparisons of options, then they tend to get kind of paralyzed about choosing one. And the indication is that your emotions go, pick that one. Is that it's more like we need to make this fast. We can't totally reason it through. We're going to take a quick look at it and go with our gut. Whether that was a good part of the decision, if we'd really thought about it or not. And some people go with their gut a lot faster. They don't necessarily go with their cognitive stuff very long at all. And then you've got your neocortex, sometimes called the cerebral cortex. And this is your decision-making center. Okay, we've taken all this into account. Now we're doing this. And it's the very start level of motor commands. Okay, cerebellum, we need to walk across the room. Okay, cerebellum, we need to say this. Okay, cerebellum, yeah, make the hands move. Make them look like Tyrannosaurus hands. Whatever. And that's the breakdown of the vertebrate system. And next we'll do the senses.